Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new episode of Dakota Boys Talk Movies. This is Steven.
And this is Dakota.
And today we're bringing you a fun-filled episode about the plane crash movie, Sully. It'll be fun-filled. It's just an interesting topic, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think really a lot of people are going to go to this just for a night of cheap laughs, really.
Yeah, the laughs in this aren't like comedic laughs. It's like, yeah. And there's not too many laughs in it. But what's interesting is I was telling Dakota, I'm like, if this were made on CBS, it would have been called Miracle on the Hudson, if it were like a CBS TV movie. But since it's in theaters, they had to give it a little more of a pretentious Oscar-sounding name, and so they called it Sully.
Yes, unfortunately, it has nothing to do with the character from the Pixar film, Monsters, Inc.
Can you imagine? It's like a biopic about, like, you knew him in college. You knew him as a scarer. You knew him as CEO of Monsters, Inc. But meet little Sully. Yeah, that would be terrible.
I think I'd pay to see that, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, but
can't be worse than Monsters University.
But the other thing I was realizing is, I think the other reason they had to call this movie Sully and not Miracle on the Hudson is because it really is more about Captain Sullenberger than it. Obviously, the Miracle on the Hudson is the big event that makes Sully who we all know him as, because not many of us knew him pre Miracle on the Hudson. But it's kind of more about how it shaped him and how it affected his life, from personal life to public life to.
So essentially this movie is about how a man became a legend.
Yes. How a general became a slave. No, it's the wrong movie. Yeah, and so this movie is the first collaboration between Clint Eastwood and Tom Hanks, and then at first you go, oh, that's cool, and then you go, wow, I'm surprised this never happened before. Especially with Tom Hanks's, he does a lot of.
Yeah, he has a track record for playing historical characters.
Yeah, and Clint Eastwood has a track record, especially lately, of doing kind of character movies, and specifically based on true story character movies. And so it is kind of surprising, really, that this is the first time they've ever worked together.
Are we sure Spielberg wasn't hired to direct this first?
No, but Kennedy Marshall did produce this movie.
Yeah.
Specifically more Frank Marshall than Kathleen Kennedy. She's a little busy with Star Wars, I think, and Indiana Jones and all that jazz. But her husband, Frank Marshall, did produce this movie. This movie starts out pretty interesting. It brings you into after the crash a little bit, and kind of meeting Sully a little bit. And about the time you were kind of like, man, are they going to show the crash happen, or are we just going to kind of see it through memory and news report type things? And you're not sure. And then it gets to a point where you're kind of like, you don't really care anymore if you do see it. And then about the time you get to that point where you think you're not going to see it, they do go back and recount the events leading up to the crash. And so, yeah, it was kind of interesting. How did you feel about, Dakota and I were talking about this afterwards, how Clint Eastwood has a tendency to do very linear movies. Like, it's kind of pretty straightforward. We go from here to here, and everything in between is going to be leading to the other here. But this one wasn't.
Yeah, this movie is completely non-linear.
And not in, like, the Tarantino way where it just jumps to weird vignettes, but, like, it'll be him reminiscing, and then you'll be back here. And if you're looking away or distracted at the wrong moment, you may not catch that, because he doesn't make a big deal about, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Dakota. It doesn't make like a big flashback with title of when it was and stuff.
Yeah, there's no wipe screen, and there's no like melodramatic music to let you know that we've jumped time.
Or the giant letters on the screen like in Captain America Civil War about where you are now.
Yeah. But that was definitely one of the more surprising and almost refreshing parts of this movie. Not Steven Spielberg. Clint Eastwood, like I said, he's too kind of linear in his stories, and I think that's kind of hurt him a little bit in a couple of his movies.
Yeah, we were talking about this again earlier, how I feel like some of his movies get draggy to the point of almost boring because he's so linear in that respect, where because he was so linear that he didn't want to jump to the next thing too quick when he really could have at times without hurting it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it did make this one a little refreshing. But overall, and the other interesting thing about this movie is he's not a real huge fan of CGI. And this movie had, they couldn't really crash a real plane again. And so obviously this did have to use some CGI moments.
Yeah, there was even, I can't remember if it was one dream sequence or, no, it was a couple where, you kind of see like Sully's worst fears playing out in his mind.
It's kind of him battling like things that could have been his worst fears, things that could have happened if he would have done. Because the thing is not only is he being questioned a little bit on if he did the right thing, but he's also thinking, man, one different split-second decision and everything could have been totally different. And he's kind of like processing all this just days after it happened, and at the same time also being like in 9-hour depositions with the safety board questioning everything he did. And so you're kind of seeing this whole, that's kind of what the movie really focuses on, is his inner struggle of if he did the right thing, and then the actual process of the authorities over him questioning him on if he did the right thing. And then of course I don't know, Dakota, do you remember when this happened pretty well? This happened January 15th, 2009. Do you remember when this happened very well?
I don't remember where I was when it happened, but I remember,
not necessarily where you were, but
I do remember waking up, not necessarily waking up, but I remember coming home from work and hearing, I thought it was a small plane at first that had landed on the Hudson.
It's because it's like nearly improbable that a jetliner could land and have nobody critically injured like the way it did.
And I just remember all the talk. There was people interviewing the survivors, and they were obviously pretty shaken up. I mean, in that sort of situation, it's like, oh, we're going down and we're gonna hit the water. What in your mind in that situation? Like, there's only one outcome you kind of foresee.
Yeah, it's when you're going down in a giant airliner, it's, well, we're dead. Yeah, and so what's kind of interesting though is I remember that, and how instantaneously I was, and how instantaneously most of the media was, just saying how that pilot was amazing, and he was instantly a hero to everyone. And this story kind of shows the other side that we didn't really see as much, kind of the behind closed doors thing, where, and it wasn't really all necessarily behind closed doors, it's just not what everybody in the social zeitgeist of the world was thinking about, but was, well, could he have done something different that would have been better? Could he have actually landed on an airstrip to where people wouldn't be, okay, yeah, you landed safely on the water, but then everybody could have still drowned or got hypothermia, and there was all these different scenarios, or the fact that it was going to be a huge insurance claim on the airline because he hit the water, when they're questioning, well, could you have landed the plane somewhere and it wouldn't have destroyed an entire jet and affected all these people in this way? And so it's kind of like all these things, the side of the story we didn't totally see.
This movie is kind of it's one of those little pieces of history that no one's really that familiar with, because like you said, it kind of happened behind closed doors, and you wouldn't think someone who had just saved a plane full of people would kind of be, he was essentially investigated to make sure that he wasn't drunk, he wasn't on drugs, He wasn't stressed out that morning. Just to make sure.
Did you have a good night's sleep? Are you mad at your wife? I mean, it was like every little thing.
Yeah, it was kind of, and you wouldn't expect that, and it's kind of, I don't know. We were just talking about how some of the critics kind of said that they vilified the bureaucrats that were investigating him. And I don't know if I am too by calling them bureaucrats, but
yeah, they were just saying that in reality, the safety board wasn't as overtly hostile towards Sully as they make him out in the movie. And that could be, I mean, in the movie, it's like, a couple of the safety board people are played by Mike O'Malley and Anna Gunn, two actors that people are kind of aware from different things. And they're both just always like giving this look to Sully like, we know you're hiding something, scumbag. It's like they, and they do kind of treat them in a way where they're always looking at Sully as if he made a mistake. And I think part of it is that is their job. It's kind of like internal affairs at a police department.
Yeah.
Where it's like their job is to really be skeptical of anyone, and to make sure they've covered everything. Like, well, yeah, everything that cop says sounds good, but are they really a dirty cop? That's kind of what internal affairs is. And it's almost like the safety board is kind of the FAA's version of internal affairs, almost. Like, could you have done it better? And then, of course, the other person that wasn't talked about much in the media, but was played in this movie by Aaron Eckhart, was his co-pilot, which it's bad. You see what I'm saying? I can't even remember his name. His co-pilot, Jeff Skiles was the name of his co-pilot. Aaron Eckhart played him. And by the way, they're both sporting awesome mustaches in this movie. Aaron Eckhart just had a big old Tom Selleck mustache. But, in this movie, co-pilot Skiles was also telling Sully, I know you made all the right decisions. I'm sticking by you. We did everything right. And so it was kind of a thing. And then, of course, all the passengers, especially since they lived, they all considered Sully a hero and things like that. And so it kind of follows that. And what happened was, I guess, to set up, in case some of you don't know this incident, is that they were flying up, and at about 2,800 feet at that altitude, they hit a flock of geese. And 2 Canadian geese went into each of the engines and bent them up and blew them out enough to where neither of them could thrust at all. And so it was a matter of basically like they only had 2,800 feet to drift somewhere is basically what it was. And so it's like everything was split second. Sully in this movie anyway, Tom Hanks' Sully kept bringing up, you got to figure in the human factor with all these things because we had to think on the spot how to handle this best for the 155 people that were aboard. And so yeah, it's kind of the whole go of the movie. And so Tom Hanks has a pretty good track record for being good in whatever if it's a movie you think is stupid, usually you still think like, Tom Hanks is pretty good. How did you feel about him in this movie?
I thought he was pretty good. I mean, it was just last year he was in
Bridge of Spies.
He was in Bridge of Spies, and he kind of amazed me in that movie. I guess it had been a while since I had seen him in anything where he actually had to do some genuine acting. And just like in this one, I thought he was amazing. He kind of portrays Sully as going through post-traumatic stress, both him and Aaron Eckhart. And they were just so both genuine in their roles that it actually kind of made me feel for them.
Yeah. And the other, and as usual, it's like, even though he always had, like, I think I mentioned this in our Bridge of Spies review, even though he always looks like Tom Hanks, after a while, because you're invested in the story, his investment into the character helps him chameleon into the story where you don't think of him as Tom Hanks really anymore. Like, after a while, I wasn't, like, watching Tom Hanks. I was watching, I was just watching Sully. I think he's just really good at, even though he's really recognizable and in a lot of things, he's one who can just kind of chameleon into roles.
Yeah.
And so, and like we mentioned, Aaron Eckhart played his co-pilot, and then it's kind of, there's a lot. There's kind of a who's who cast of people. You're like, oh, I've seen that face before, and I've seen that face before. Some of the other more known people would be Laura Linney, played Sully's wife. Who else would be really known in this?
Fans of Law and Order would recognize Jamie Sheridan.
Oh yeah, yep.
Michael Rappaport, who's been
like I said, just kind of becomes a who's who, really.
Yeah.
And then another interesting thing is there's probably about a half dozen roles in this movie that were played by the people who actually were those people. So one of the ferry boat drivers, captains.
Yeah.
It was the actual ferry captain from that day. They reprised their. Was it reprise when they played themselves?
They played themselves, yeah.
They're not really reprising because they played themselves. And
They're reprising moments from their life.
And I think that just helps kind of with the reality, because even though you have, like I said, Tom Hanks, Laura Linney, Aaron Eckhart, like people you see and stuff, that once you start filling the rest of your cast with just real people or people that are just kind of faces in the crowd, and you're not really like, oh, there's, who in here, and stuff, it kind of, like, I found myself getting genuinely emotional, like it was real. It was kind of like, Dakota, did you see the Paul Greengrass's movie United 93?
I have, yeah.
Like, I think, 80% of that cast was the real people? It felt like he got a lot of the real people who were involved, like the air traffic control, and he got nobodies to play the parts in that movie.
Yeah,
or the people who weren't on the plane to play themselves in a lot of roles. And so it made it just feel really real, which was good and also bad, because that movie was very hard to watch because it felt so real.
Yeah, they say by doing that, it makes it a little more real, which Clint Eastwood's kind of done that before with Gran Torino. He hired real people from Hmong neighborhoods that had like no acting experience whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they were able to pull it off. And I think that's just kind of something he likes to do.
Well, yeah, if you kind of go back into his, especially more his bio movies, like if you think of Flags of Our Fathers, I mean, the lead guys in that movie were like semi-known actors, but they weren't big stars. I mean, Jesse Bradford, Ryan Philippe, these were guys who were like, they weren't big names or anything. And so, and he kind of did that with American Sniper. There were people you knew, and obviously Bradley Cooper would be, but I mean, it was like,
yeah, he
not
did.
Distractingly known people.
Yeah, he did. I know in that one he did. There's a couple bit parts in there that are played by somewhat famous people, but I know he got, there was quite a bit of vets that had served in Iraq that he used for that.
Yeah, and I think, that's one thing I do give Clint Eastwood props for, is that he really tries to make his movies as genuine and authentic as possible. And I mean that from everything from character standpoint to, I think, production value. He just tries to make it really genuine and authentic. And I think it really played well for this movie, because this movie could have been really boring and not very interesting.
Oh yeah, this could have easily came off as a really crappy made-for-TV movie from the 90s.
Yeah, but because he was able to get people, because he was able to fill certain roles with the right caliber of actors and get people who could do it, and then to just give everything kind of a fleshed out feel, and I mean even down to the point where they filmed the crash on the Hudson on location where the crash was. I mean, it just gives it all that authenticity that is really all for the better, and so it just kind of made this movie all the more watchable and interesting, just to see this from Sully's perspective, really. And this was based off of Sully's book, Highest Duty, I think his book is called.
Yeah.
And it's just, his kind of accounts of this. And this movie also goes into a few flashbacks of his past that kind of, things that kind of made him who he who he was, who he is.
Yeah, I'm actually curious about that now. Was he a test pilot in the Air Force, maybe, or?
That's what it seemed to be alluding to. It's kind of, there's certain kind of test pilot things alluded to that you don't really know for sure. But when you're watching the movie, you're not, because you're engaged enough, you're not like on the spot, like aggravated by that. But like Dakota's doing right now, it causes you later to be like, it would be interesting to know what that was, what that was about. And so there's not much more to say about this movie. Dakota, anything else?
No, I just kind of go see it and just enjoy it for yourself, really.
Yeah, just an interesting story, and honestly, they call it Miracle on the Hudson for a reason. It really was just an amazing thing.
Yeah,
that it had played out the way it did.
To paraphrase a quote from this movie, New York City doesn't have a great track record with disasters and planes, and this is one of those ones that actually did turn out well. There was a few injuries, but nothing serious. Thankfully, everyone walked away.
Yeah. Yep. And then the other real slogan of this movie was when Tom Hanks' Sully said, 42 years of taking thousands of people to where they needed to go, and I'm going to be judged on 208 seconds.
Yeah.
And, he's just talking about he had all these years of thousands of passengers, but this 208 seconds of flight was going to make or break his entire career.
Which is insane because that is like no time at all.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't even think I could get dressed that fast.
I think I could. I know none of my kids could. They struggle with those pant legs. But, yeah, so I think overall, definitely go see this. And I think as far as grading this movie, I would give it B+.
I'm going to go with B+ too. It's just, I thought it was a pretty good film.
It's just, in my opinion, there's just certain things about it that keep it from being in that A category, but definitely high B. And part of that is Tom Hanks. Obviously just being who he is in movies, he's very good. But I think it's just a fascinating story to see played out. So, yeah. So definitely check out Sully. I wouldn't be surprised if it comes out on Blu-ray somewhere around January 15th, just because that would be fitting. But who knows? Guess we'll have to see if that'll be. Woo, that rhymed. See if that'll be. With that, we are on all those places on the computer that you can be. Things like Facebook, things like Twitter. Like us on those. Follow us on those. That's awesome. Feedback. Appreciated, as always.
For those of you who still are living in the past, we unfortunately are not on MySpace, though. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. I thought about, reopening my MySpace the other day, but it's not vintage enough yet to be like hipster cool.
Oh.
So, and also subscribe to us on whatever you listen to us on, whatever podcatcher you are, iTunes. We do put them on YouTube also. We know a lot of people use that on YouTube. So hopefully you're doing those things. But with that, end this episode. Thanks for listening. Have a good night. This is Steven.
And this is Dakota.
See you later.